Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified. What, why, and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of civil services examination. Today we have taken up daily edition of The Hindu newspaper, that is 10th of September, and also important news articles from Indian Express Explained section from the last week. The articles that we have taken up today have been displayed on the screen. Let us now begin the discussion. The first article that we have taken is extremely important from the point of view of both prelims as well as the mains examination, because this article deals with some of the very important and crucial constitutional and legislative provisions related to language in India. Language has always been a very troubling pain point for politicians and for people. And the reasons are very obvious, because language is something with which we connect, and language is something which is very intimate to people. It matters a lot, and there have been tendencies in the Indian Union towards integration and imposing the Hindi language. And so some of the defense mechanisms have been created for the regional languages, for the people who speak regional languages, and there is always a conflict between the federations and the center with respect to the language issue. And today the article that we are going to take up exactly relates to that. West Bengal unveils education policy, stresses on 3-language formula. The West Bengal government has come up with a state education policy 2023 recommending Bangla as a subject along with a 3-language formula for classes 5 to 8th. The policy takes note of the federal spirit of the country's constitution and seeks to avoid over-centralization in education. And so it has become really important for us to discuss the language of the union, the language of the judiciary and texts of the laws, regional languages, special directives, and authoritative text Central Laws Act 1973. So let us now begin the discussion. So the matters dealing with languages have been mentioned in part 17 of the Constitution of India, which is titled as Official Languages. And there are 4 chapters. Chapter 1 dealing with language of the Union. Chapter 2 dealing with regional languages or official languages of the state. Language 3 dealing with the language of the Supreme Court and the High Courts, which is the languages of the higher judiciary. And chapter 4 dealing with special directives. Now, since the language of the Constitution is very difficult to understand, we will directly look into the short notes which we have prepared for you of all these 4 chapters, and we'll try to understand the main provisions in each one of these chapters. Starting with the language of the Union. Now, if someone asks you what is the official language of Indian Union, and that is Hindi written in Devanagari script, is to be the official language of the Union, and this is given in the Constitution of India. But the form of numerals to be used for the official purposes of the Union has to be the international form of Indian numerals and not the one which are written in Devanagari scripts. Now this is confusing because most of the communications given out by the central government are in English language, and hence the first query which should come into your mind is that how come is it possible when the Constitution itself has made Hindi as official language of Indian Union? And that is because of another article which mandates that for a period of 15 years from the commencement of Constitution, that means the Constitution's commencement started in 1950. So just after the commencement of the Constitution and until 15 years from there on, the English language would continue to be used for all the official purposes of the Union for which it was being used before 1950. Since the end date for the English to be used as official language was written, why is still all the communication is in English? And that is because of the next article, which says that even after 15 years, Parliament may provide for the continued use of English language for the specified purposes. So first, Constitution made sure that in order to maintain continuity, English is used for 15 years, and then it gave the power to the Parliament to allow the continuance of English even after 15 years. And hence accordingly, Parliament enacted Official Languages Act 1963. The Act provided for continued use of English in addition to Hindi for all official purposes of the Union, and also for the transaction of business in Parliament. Now you can understand that as far as the language of the Union is concerned, it is governed by both Constitution as well as legislation enacted by the Parliament. So these are the two sources which ultimately determine the language of the Union. What about the language of the states or regional languages? So there is a big difference between the two. And that is that the Constitution does not specify official languages of the states as it did in the case of Union. And of course it makes sense, keeping in view the diversity of India, this flexibility was provided. And just like in the case of center, the power was given to Parliament, in case of states, the power was given to legislature. Constitution says that legislature of a state may adopt any one or more of the languages in use in a state or Hindi as the official language of a particular state. So utilizing the provisions of this particular article, most of the states have adopted the major regional language as their own official language. For example, Andhra Pradesh has adopted Telugu, Kerala, Malayalam, Assam, Assamese, Odisha, Odia, and various states in the north, for example, Himachal Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Bihar, Jharkhand, Haryana, and Rajasthan have adopted Hindi. They were able to do that simply because the Constitution says that legislature of a state may adopt any one or more of the languages in use in a state as their own official language. Now the matter doesn't end there, because a state needs to talk to two entities, another states and center. And for this linkage, the Constitution of India says that the official language of the Union would remain the link language for communication as far as interstate communication is concerned and the communication with the center is concerned. But there is an exception over here. If two or more states agree to use Hindi for communicating among each other, they can agree to do so, and that will be held totally legal. For example, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh and Bihar have entered into such an agreement, and any official communication among these four states is done in Hindi. So that provision has also been given in the Constitution. Then another very important clause of regional languages section of Constitution is the directives given by the President. So when a President is satisfied that a substantial proportion of the population of a state desires the use of any language spoken by them to be recognized by that particular state, then the President may direct that such language shall also be officially recognized in that particular state. So a big discretion and a power has been entrusted with the President, and that has been done to protect the linguistic interests of minorities in a particular state. It was felt that a language spoken by a very small section of people in a state may never be protected and recognized as official language, and hence that protection can be enabled directly from the central government through President, which can order a particular language being spoken in a particular state to be recognized as an official language of that particular state. So far we have done language of the Union and regional languages. But what about the judiciary? Does Constitution says anything about the language to be used in the conduct of the business of the higher judiciary? Yes, Constitution makes very important and significant provisions with respect to language to be used by the judiciary. And first and foremost is that until Parliament provides otherwise, two things are to be in English language only. Constitution says that all proceedings in Supreme Court and High Court must be conducted in English only, and the authoritative text of all the bills, acts, ordinances, orders, rules and regulations, both for central as well as state governments and legislature and parliament, shall be in English only. What does authoritative text means? Now we know that bills and acts, ordinance, orders, rules, regulations and even judgments are dependent on the language and their interpretation. And most of the legal trouble originates because of the language and the words or the grammar used in that particular language. So authoritative text is recognized or accepted as being true or reliable. And if there is any kind of confusion with respect to implementation of an order or act or any other regulation, then the authoritative text and the meaning which is arrived at by reading of that particular text shall be considered as supreme, and hence authoritative text has a big importance in law. The Constitution also says until Parliament provides otherwise. So you should keep this important fact in mind that Parliament can change both these provisions. So the power has been given by the Constitution to the Parliament to change the language which will be used in the proceedings of Supreme Court and High Court, and to also change the language in which authoritative texts of these things shall be published. So obviously now the question arises that since all the people in our country are not well versed in English language, and so is it not violation of natural justice that all the justice shall be carried out in a particular language which is alien to Indian people? And that is why the Constitution has made a provision in which the governor of a state, with previous consent of the president, can authorize the use of Hindi or any other official language of the state in the proceedings in the High Court of the state. So if the governor feels that in Karnataka it is important for people to plead in Kannada, then governor, after taking consent from president, allow that to happen. But Constitution specifically mentions that this provision will not be applicable to judgments, decrees and orders. So all these three things will continue to remain in English or any other language which the Parliament can provide for, but the governor can allow the proceedings in the High Court to happen in any other language. So far we have seen three things: language of the Union, regional languages and language of the judiciary. Let's now understand the special directives given in the Constitution. So there are four provisions which are categorized under special directives. They are special orders or duties entrusted by the Constitution on Indian executives. So the first is language to be used in representation for redressal of the grievances. Every aggrieved person has the right to submit a representation for the redress of any grievance to any officer or authority of the Union or authority of any state in any language used in the Union or in the state, as the case may be. So if a person has to complain or has a problem, then that complaint can be written in any language used in the state if the complaint is against state officials or machinery. So through this provision, the Constitution has made sure that all those people who do not know the official languages of the Union or the state are not devoid of the right to complain. And hence it is not important for them to use any of the official languages. This means that a representation cannot be rejected on the ground that it is not in the official language. Then Constitution also provides for facilities for instruction in mother tongue. Every state and a local authority in the state should provide adequate facilities for instruction in mother tongue at the primary stage of education to children belonging to linguistic minority groups. And President has been empowered to issue necessary directions for this purpose. Then in order to safeguard various kinds of rights given to linguistic minorities in our country, the Constitution makes the provision of appointment of special officer for linguistic minorities. The President should appoint a special officer for linguistic minorities to investigate all matters relating to the constitutional safeguards for linguistic minorities and report to him. Constitution also makes provisions for placing of this report on the table of the Parliament. And then finally, the Constitution imposes a duty upon the centre to promote the spread and development of Hindi language. The Constitution uses a very unique term, lingua franca, or a language that is adopted as a common language, or also a bridge language or a common language, which is a language which is used to communicate among two sets of people who do not know each other's mother tongue. So for example, communication between two sets of people speaking language A and language C. and lingua franca is the one which enables the communication for the simple reason that it is understood by both of them. And constitution envisages the development of Hindi in our country in such a way that eventually it becomes lingua franca or the bridge language of Indian Union, understood and spoken by everyone. And that is one of the biggest problems and the challenges to the India's federal structure as well. And we shall not go into those details. That is a discussion for another time, because now it's time to focus on what has been discussed in today's editorial. So as we all know that recently the government came up with notification on EIA or Environment Impact Assessment in English and in Hindi. And hence then a lot of people went to court, and two of the high courts have asked the government to publish the notification in all 22 languages which are mentioned in 8th schedule to the Constitution of our India. But the government of India has declined to do so, and the reasons given by the government are twofold. First is that the government of India has said that it is not required by the law to publish these notifications in 22 languages mentioned in the 8th schedule. We have seen that Official Languages Act 1963 requires the publication of law only in English and Hindi, and hence it leads to the exclusion of non-English and non-Hindi people. And the second reason given by the government is that if they start to translate one particular notification in 22 languages, they will have to take care of so many definitions, languages, and they will have to issue a lot of clarifications in order to reduce the confusions which shall arrive due to the changes in the meaning which will occur. For example, when the translation from English to Telugu will take place, because not all languages contain the words which communicate the same meaning, and hence it leads to a lot of problems. So these are the two reasons which have been given by the central government while opposing the orders issued by the High Court. But the author says that there are two very strong reasons why government should actually try to publish almost all the acts, notifications and various other publications in all the languages mentioned in the 8th schedule of our constitution. And the first is that the author says there is an act known by the name of Authoritative Texts Central Laws Act 1973, which provides not only for the translation of various kinds of publication of the central government, but it also empowers the government to recognize the authoritative translation of all central laws into 8 scheduled languages. And the provisions of this particular act are also applicable to rules and regulations and notifications, just like environment impact assessment. So the author says that the argument of the government does not hold any ground, because there will be no confusion if the government uses the powers given in the Authoritative Text Central Laws Act 1973, through which the government can actually recognize authoritative translations which will not lead to any kind of confusion which the government is saying will occur. And the second important reason why author wants the publication of all these rules, regulations and acts into a lot of languages is because he wants the laws to be inclusive. He wants the laws to be understood by the people. And hence he talks about the translation as a legal right, because it is reasonable to argue that citizens are not bound by the laws that are not made available to them in their own language. Supreme Court has also said various times that citizens are not bound by the laws which have not been published and publicized. And publication or advertisement of a notification in only English or Hindi means that it is practically not published for people who speak any other language except Hindi or English. And hence the author says that Indians should not be expected to be bound by central laws unless Parliament makes laws in their own languages. So overall, this particular discussion has a lot to offer from the perspective of both prelims as well as mains examination. For prelims, you need to keep in mind the provision of the Constitution, and for mains, along with these provisions, you also need to keep in mind why is it important that the laws be published in as many languages as possible.
Let's now take up the articles which have appeared in the Indian Express. India, Middle East, Europe Mega Economic Corridor. What is the project? Why is it being proposed? So the Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced the launch of India Middle East Europe Mega Economic Corridor. The project includes India, UAE, Saudi Arabia, European Union, France, Italy, Germany and US. He also said that today we all have reached an important and historic partnership. In the coming times, it will be a major medium of economic integration between India, West Asia and Europe. So what is this project all about? The Rail and Shipping Corridor is a part of Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment, acronymed as PGII, a collaborative effort by the G7 nations to fund infrastructure projects in developing nations. PGII is considered to be the bloc's counter to China's Belt and Road Initiative. You can only counter hegemony of China by proposing a counter narrative and a counter project. So the project will aim to enable greater trade among the involved countries, including energy products. It could also be one of the major ambitious counters to China's massive infrastructure program, through which it has sought to connect more of the world to that of country's economy. The corridor will include a rail link as well as an electricity cable, a hydrogen pipeline and a high-speed data cable, according to a document prepared by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The document also called the project a green and digital bridge across continents and civilizations. Why is the project being proposed? And there are three distinct reasons for it. First, it would increase prosperity among the countries involved through an increased flow of energy and digital communications. Second, the project would help deal with the lack of infrastructure needed for growth in lower and middle income nations. And third, it could turn the temperature down on turbulence and insecurity coming out of Middle East. So the African Union was admitted as a new member of the G20 on Saturday, barely 3 months after India floated the idea of including the organization. The development took place at the ongoing 18th G20 Heads of State and Government Summit in New Delhi. So the question is, what is African Union? Why was it formed? What is the significance of AU? What has it achieved so far? And so this discussion is going to be about African Union and how effective is it. So the African Union is an intergovernmental organization of 55 member states located on the continent of Africa. Launched on July 2002, the grouping is the successor of Organization of African Unity, which was formed in 1963. The AU seeks to build an integrated, prosperous and peaceful Africa driven by its own citizens, according to its website. The AU Secretariat, the African Union Commission, is based in Addis Ababa, which is located in Ethiopia. Collectively, the group has a GDP of $3 trillion with some 1.4 billion people. The AU's predecessor was also an intergovernmental organization, and it aimed to bring African nations together and resolve common issues through collective action. Its main focus, however, was to help liberate the colonized countries on the continent. To do so, OAU mustered diplomatic support and provided logistical aid to the liberation movement across Africa. So what are the objectives of AU? Unlike OAU, the AU concentrates its energy and resources on achieving greater unity and solidarity between African countries and their people. It seeks to accelerate the process of political and socio-economic integration of the continent. Moreover, the AU addresses the multifaceted social, economic, and political problems that the African nations have been facing. Its key objectives also include promoting peace, stability, and security across the region. Protecting and promoting human rights are also part of its agenda. So, what are the notable achievements of AU? Many of the AU's peacekeeping missions have helped governments tackle terrorism across Africa, from Sahel to northern Mozambique. Over the years, the organization's interventions have prevented violence in countries like Burundi, Central African Republic, Comoros, Darfur, Somalia, South Sudan, Sudan, and Mali. AU's diplomatic efforts have also resulted in resolving conflicts in Africa. Last year, it brokered a peace deal between Ethiopian government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front in South Africa, almost 2 years after the two entities began fighting. The establishment of African Continental Free Trade Area, which came into force in 2021, is yet another achievement of the organization. With 54 member countries as signatories, it is the world's largest new free trade area since establishment of the WTO in 1994. So, are there any shortcomings of AU as well? Of course, one failure of AU has been its inability to thwart coups in Africa. Since 1960, the continent has witnessed more than 200 coups. The most recent ones took place in Gabon and Niger. And the obvious reason is that the continental body never sends a military intervention to suppress the putschists or the people who take up arms to remove the government, to capture them and bring them to trial for treason. It limits itself to diplomatic pressure against them, such as suspending their membership. The organization has also been able to get its member countries to pay their annual dues, leaving it starved of funds. As a result, it has to depend on external funding, which impacts its obvious autonomy.